Hello, freak bitches.
I'm from a culture that used to be maligned, and then I thought wasn't anymore, and then very recently things have gotten weird again.
Yeah, and it's really easy to say that Jews are responsible for a large problem, part of the problem in the world today. I've seen it a lot lately. I'm like, this used to be like really inappropriate thinking and talking just 20 years ago.
It used to be very taboo, and it is not anymore. And it's weird. It's very weird. It's definitely I don't take stuff anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is like the closest I come to believing in magic, because it's like I'm not a big mystical guy, but like anti-Semitism has never gone away. It just has, and I could see if you're an anti-Semite, you're going, the evil of the Jews is the closest I come to believing in magic, because they just never stop being evil. Like, I just don't understand how this never goes away. It never goes away. It's so fucking weird. Like, no matter where Jews have lived, no matter how assimilated they've been. You know that the Jews in Berlin were the most assimilated Jews in history? They were known for having Christmas trees and eating pork, and they would describe these like Christmas parties where it would only be Jews because the Germans wouldn't go, but it would be all of them celebrating Christmas. They were the most assimilated Jews ever, and that was the epicenter of the Nazi movement.
Yeah.
So it follows the Jews. And I mean, I know that I'm sure at least one of your listeners is like, no, the Jews follow it. But it's like, it's crazy. It just won't go away. It's a virus that won't ever die down.
Well, I think there's a bunch of problems with this anti-Semitic thing going on. And one of them is the accomplishments of the Jews are very disproportionate, especially European Jews. If you look at European Jews and Nobel Prize winners, it's fucking staggering.
It's
European
insane.
Jews who are intellectuals, chess champions,
Yep.
There's a select gene pool, particularly European Jews.
Yeah, we also have bigger
sciences.
dicks. Nobody talks about that.
I don't think that's true.
You don't think?
No.
I thought it was Jews and then no. Okay.
No, it's,
okay.
Giant people. Samoans probably have huge hogs. But do you know the story of Fritz Haber?
Mm-mm.
Fritz Haber is one of the most shocking Jewish stories in terms of a Jewish scientist who was a part of World War I on the side of the Germans. He also invented the Haber method of extracting nitrogen from the environment. You know, nitrogen is one of the most important things when it comes to fertilizer. We were talking about fertilizing plants. And nitrogen is 80% of the air we breathe. Most people think the air is oxygen and carbon dioxide. It's mostly nitrogen. And then there's some oxygen, and then there's some carbon dioxide that we breathe out that the plants use. Fritz Haber figured out a way to extract nitrogen from the actual oxygen, from the actual air around us, and take that nitrogen and use it in the soil as fertilizer. He won a Nobel Prize for that. And 50% of the nitrogen in most people's bodies came from the Haber method. Like this is like from, you know, the early 1900s, this guy figured this out. It's still being used today. He also was the first guy to invent using poison gas, and they used it on the Allied troops in World War I. So he was wanted for crimes against humanity and simultaneously winning the Nobel Prize during World War I. And then when the Nazis took over, he created Zyklon A. Zyklon A is it's a gas that has a very distinct smell, and I think it was a pesticide. And they used Zyklon A. The smell was added to it to make people acutely aware that this pesticide was being used because it was very poisonous. They changed it to Zyklon B, which is what they used to gas the Jews. So this fucking guy created the actual gas that was used in the fucking concentration camps to kill the Jews. And they just took the smell out of it. That's how they created Zyklon B. Whatever that thing was that they added to Zyklon A to make it smell bad, they took that out for Zyklon B, so it was almost odorless. And they were killing people left and right with it. And he was forced out of the country. I mean, it's a crazy, crazy story. I mean, when he was going to the front line to help implement his gas on the Allied troops, his wife shot herself in front of him.
Jesus.
And he left his kid behind with his dying wife to go to war. It's fucking crazy. Story's crazy. And he wound up dying, seeking refuge away from Germany. He was one of the few scientists that they didn't, one of the few Jews they didn't lock up. And he just couldn't tolerate, I mean, he couldn't stand by while these other Jews that he knew were going to the concentration camps and people were being rounded up and
did he know?
Leaving. Did he know that Zyklon B?
Yeah.
I think that might have happened like while he was on the run. I'm not sure. I'd have to get into that, but
I mean, that would be a crazy realization. That I mean, it's like the the TNT guy, the guy that built dynamite, like realizing what he'd done to the world. I mean,
how about Oppenheimer?
Right? Yeah.
I mean, Oppenheimer is quoting the Bhagavad Gita. We played that on the podcast last week.
I am become death, destroyer of worlds.
Fuck, man.
That is, can you? Speaking of billionaires being evil, I mean, to have that quote is like, that's a big yikes moment.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, I think there's that, is that Jews have been so, almost genetically smart for so long.
There's a reason for that, you know?
What is it?
It's that basically in the whole of the Dark Ages are characterized by people being illiterate. They were in the dark and only the clergy could read. That the Jews were a 98% literate people. I mean, and that is literally the reason. If you want to talk, it actually all comes all the way back to systemic oppression, right? In the same way that there are barriers, if you're deaf or if you're black or if you're a woman, there are barriers you have to jump past. If you are given an advantage, I mean, it's all evolution, right? Then you're going to leap forward. And so when you have a history of 500 years where no one in Europe reads except for the Jews and the clergy, well, no shit, they ended up, being at the front lines of, of Nobel Prize winning in science and intellectualism, not because they're smarter, obviously, but because they just were reading that whole time. And there's a reason for the idea of Jewish greed, too. Is that, do you know about this? Is that Jesus said something about usury. Basically, Catholics were not okay with lending money at an interest rate. That was against the rules, right? And so you're not going to lend people money for no interest. That's just not how it works. And then there were some people that weren't subject to the rules of Christian anti-usury laws, and those were the Jews. And so the Jews would lend you money at an interest rate. But who do you hate more than anybody on earth? Who's the person you wish were dead? Your creditor. The banker that is going to foreclose on your home and is going to... Now, I'm not saying that's good or bad. I also hate the banker, but that's just historically speaking, when they call Jews moneylenders, it's not because Jews are like, oh, I'm pernicious and I want to fill this gap. It's that nobody else in society would lend people money. And so not only were they the creditors that people hated, but they were also the financiers that made the possibility of European, greatness occur, because without capital, without funds, you can't build a society. So that is one of the many reasons that people have come to hate the Jews, is that they lent them the money and that they needed, and then when it was time to come collecting, they'd be like, fuck this dude.
So fascinating we could find the root of certain prejudices.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure.
That's a good one. Those two are very good ones, especially the one about being literate. I mean, absolutely, that makes sense. I mean, It wasn't until the 1400s with Martin Luther that they just started translating the Bible into a phonetic alphabet where people could read it. I mean, stop and think about that.
It's crazy.